So I'm here in Brussels for the European Development Days organized by the European Commission. 16 young people under 26 have been selected to be the young leaders on different topics ranging from renewable energy to gender issues and youth empowerment. I have the pleasure of interviewing one of this year's young leaders. This is Farahnaz Ghodsinia, and she's been selected to speak on the topic of building global partnerships, speaking on the theme of peace and prosperity. This interview is brought to you by Go Think Initiative, an organization based in Prague, which promotes education and civil responsibility, international affairs, and interpreting the media. Farah has been elected the president of the 10th National Youth Parliament of the Philippines, which is the biggest parliamentary gathering of young leaders in her country. She also manages the Children of Mindanao, which is an educational venture that reaches out to children from minority communities. Farah has also been named one of this year's 30 Game Changers under 30 by Lifestyle Asia. Great. Well, thank you very much for having this interview with us. Can you tell me how long this armed conflict has been going on, or maybe even before it became armed?
Yes. I think it's important to actually look at the history of the Philippines, of how the Philippines came to be. In my group in Southern Philippines, we have had communities who've actually resisted almost every type of foreign occupation and colonization. And this type of resistance of trying to fight for independence has persisted for so many years. But throughout that process of actually forming the Philippines, creating the Filipino identity, I feel that in terms of political and economic engagement, many Filipino Muslims have not actually been really represented and cared for, and which is why many actually feel left behind, or actually not part of this entire community or nation. So this is actually one of the real causes of why this conflict continues to persist. Aside from that, if you look at how our education is actually, like our educational models, the curriculums that we have, and how history is actually being taught, it's not truly collective or inclusive of the entire Filipino identity. And that is why it's also another solution, I think, if we want to really bridge the gap and bring about lasting peace. We have to change mindsets, and we have to create that feeling of inclusion. And we can do that by ensuring that our educational models and our history is history that is inclusive. That when a child, whether that child is from Luzon, Visayas, or Mindanao, actually goes to school and learns his history and learns interreligious studies, what he or she actually learns is one of cohesion. He gets to have a sense of understanding that, hey, that person in the Mindanao is actually my brother, is actually my sister. That person also fought for independence. He comes from ancestors with such a rich history and rich culture that makes the Philippines in general beautiful.
I'm really glad you mentioned it like that, because that's something that I'm fighting now.
Yes.
But I'm living in a very developed region with access to everything and mostly democracies. So it's interesting how these problems will travel and will probably be persistent even after you have peace and democracy.
Yes.
Can you tell us when the last colonizers left the Philippines?
Okay, so in terms of foreign presence in the Philippines, like you would have first the Spanish occupation, and then you'd have the Japanese coming in, and then the Americans coming in.
When was the Americans? Is that around the Second World War?
Yes, around the Second World War. But then eventually the Philippines managed to gain its full independence, and as I've said, I think...
So like the 50s, 60s, like during the big global decolonization process?
Yes, during that time frame. But then again, like in our effort to bring about genuine independence, representation has not really been given to the voices in the South. But the thing is, the government has tried to, let's say, make a concession towards this by creating an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. However, we can see that many years later, this autonomous region has actually not really maximized its full potential, and which is why the government is consistently trying to bring about newer models of change. Like what other types of reformation in the governmental structure can we actually introduce? But you see Odessa, that's the thing. I also believe that it's not enough to reform the structure of this autonomous region. If the system itself, or if the region itself is still rigged by corruption and lack of respect for rule of law, then no matter what change of nomenclature of name of this region, you're not going to fully actualize the goals that you want to see. So for me, it's important to also ensure that in whatever type of greater level of autonomy that we provide, we actually ensure that we have a strong adherence to the rule of law, so that the fruits of the peace process will be enjoyed not just by the greedy few, but by everyone.
So it's like top priorities is battling like the root
Exactly.
of corruption and like basic following of the rule of law.
Yes, exactly.
Can you tell us kind of what the government is like in the Philippines? What is the system of government, and are they like more towards like leaning towards a democracy? Is it more autocracy?
Okay, well, the Philippines is a democracy. We do have the 3 branches of the government, and currently, I would have to say that even during the previous administration and in the current administration, our government has showed its commitment to pursue the peace process. However, again, it has been difficult because different groups as well try to promote their own interests. And also, what's crucial to look at is that since we have the 3 branches of government, so even if the executive branch may be so willing to put forward a new political framework, the legislative branch has to examine whatever proposal is actually made, and they have to be careful in looking at what degree of autonomy you actually provide to this particular region, because in a way you don't want to also give complete separation to this region. And for me, as a young Maranao, as a young Filipino Muslim, I don't advocate for my region to completely break away from the country. I am a Filipino first and foremost, but what I do advocate for is that we recognize that there have been historical injustices that have occurred in the past. And I think it is just and due that we give this kind of concession to the people in the South. This is, in a way, builds confidence among all the people in the entire Philippines, knowing that, okay, you could do your own thing, but still you're part of the general goal.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult when a country is officially signed off as a democracy. People stop seeing the problems that that country has because they think, okay, well then that's at least a better step, and now we can work more on aid processes. But really, the conflict is ongoing.
Yes.
So, can you tell me, because as a young leader here, what do you do as a young person to aid in the peace process, and what is the role of the youth?
Okay, well, back home, I'm a government scholar at the University of the Philippines. I'm currently a law student, and I hope that eventually I could use this field to be of service to my fellow people, especially the most vulnerable ones. But in the meantime, I also manage Children of Mindanao, as I've introduced a while ago, and through this, we actually reached out to these conflict-stricken and fragile regions because many people find it difficult to enter into these places. They're fearful and apprehensive of the environment. But then me, being part of that group, seeing the face of my mom and the face of these women that I go to, it's easier for me to reach out. And in that small little way, I try to do what I can. You know, Odessa, before actually coming here at the ADB Forum, we planned to do an outreach back in Marawi City. We wanted to give school materials because classes were about to start again in the Philippines. However, because of the eruption of the recent conflict, that has been postponed. Everyone needs to flee the region. So you see how it's difficult to actually promote sustainable development goals of education, for example, if there's an ongoing conflict.
Can you say a little bit about that conflict? Because I know you mentioned this before, that they're trying to affiliate with ISIS.
Yeah.
So can you describe how that, what that conflict is specifically that was recently in the region that you wanted to aid?
Yes, okay. So in this particular regions, you would have terror groups that try to affiliate themselves with global terrorist organizations, and this particular new group is of such organization. And you know, it's sad because they do these acts in the name of a particular religion. But as you can see, they attack a place which is predominantly Muslim.
Yeah.
They're
attacking their own people.
They're attacking their own people. It escapes my mind. So this is also another point that I'd like to convey. Terrorism does not know, it doesn't speak or carry any brand of religion. Yeah. Islam is a religion that tries to bring about peace and justice in a community. And this type of fighting, for whatever cause this is, by creating chaos and putting the lives of people at risk, whether they be Muslims or Christians, escapes my mind. Yeah.
Can maybe, because I've met with a lot of Muslims from the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of them try to explain to people from different regions, like me from Europe, that ISIS has nothing to do with
Yes.
Islam.
Yeah.
Because in Islam, you cannot kill, you cannot hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the
Yes.
terrorists that are hurting themselves to hurt other people, it's not Islam.
Yeah.
And that's a very important message to people that are afraid in Europe and in America. So
Yeah.
maybe can you say a little bit about Islam and how it's not actually it's not really that
Yes.
it's not affiliated with the Islamic State.
You know, what he actually said really touched my heart, because as you can see, this issue that we have in the Philippines is also this sense of insecurity that we have in the Philippines with regard to extremism and fundamentalist views is also experienced in other countries of the world. And it is a problem that we have to acknowledge. But in trying to acknowledge this problem, we also need to be careful and not branding an entire group of people following a particular religion as also our enemies, because they're not our enemies. I am not your enemy. People like me are also victims in this process. And for us to actually fight this extremism, it's important that we also gain a sense of understanding of what Islam really is. Not so much like in-depth studying, but at least a general understanding. And again, that goes into the role of education and exposure. Expose people. Let them meet other individuals practicing that faith, and you'd be able to see that we're not all of the same category, and that these individuals who do a particular thing are just part of a very small sector, and they're not representative of the entire Muslim population.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at also, for example, Christianity as a very dark past that is not currently associated with the religion of Christianity.
Yeah.
And there was many missionary trips where people would kill in the name of God.
Exactly.
And tried to, like in the Middle East, for example,
Exactly.
the Europeans would come. So I think it's very comparable, and I think it's very important to understand the levels of development that these religions have.
Precisely.
My next question is quite on point. What role does interfaith understanding and education bring in the peace process specifically?
Okay, you know, oftentimes people fear what they do not understand. You fear what is different to you.
And it's natural to do.
Exactly, it's natural. I'm not blaming people. It's a natural instinct. But then, that's why we see the role of education and exposure. It's important to actually be able to understand things which you may think are threatening to you, but are actually not a threat to you. From my own personal experience, you see, I grew up in a Catholic school for girls for almost a decade of my life. That's like almost half of my life. My values formation was formed in this Catholic girls' school. And I formed bonds of sisterhood with Catholic friends. In that school, I was the only Muslim girl. I was the only Mindanao girl in that institution. But then that gave me that level of exposure to actually see people eye to eye. Not just beyond, hey, you're a Catholic, I'm a Muslim, or you're from this particular ethnic group, I'm from this. No, I saw you as another individual. And for them, they also got to meet someone like me. And to hopefully, shatter any stereotypes that they would actually have. So taking from that personal experience, I think we can replicate this ability to create bonds of sisterhood and bonds of brotherhood in a nationwide scale by, again, utilizing education, like specifically the curriculum. Science and math are important subjects. But how about history and inclusive history? And how about interfaith studies? If you see that you come from a country that has so much interfaith tension or intercultural tension, then utilize such basic models of education, for example, to bridge the gap early on. Do it early on. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity that has been missed for so many decades.
How would you compare the values that you learned when you went to the Catholic school with the values that you know from your own religion, from Islam?
Yes. What's very beautiful is that there's much more in common between these two religions than what people would think to be actually the difference. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, after all, come from a single line of the Abrahamic faiths. So somehow it's a bit sad when I feel that many other people think that I'm too different from them. But when you actually study the faiths, there's so much in common. And I think that's what you have to actually focus on, the similarities. Similarities and common values that could actually unite you instead of divide you.
Just as a small story, I was in Lebanon and I met a family of Christians who experienced the conflict that was in 2006 and the 1990s in Lebanon. overlapping with Syria, and they remember they were once stopped by the military, Muslim military, and asked if they can say something from the Quran, and they started panicking, and the husband went off and said a few sentences, and they let them go, and the wife said, but that was from the Bible.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, well, it's very similar. It's the same principles and same values, and there's not that much difference.
Yes.
Okay, so what are the main challenges? I want to get back to exactly your work. What are the main challenges that you meet in doing your advocacy?
Okay, I think you can very much relate to this as a young leader. I've often been told in talks that I've attended to, in events, that you know what, you gave a very good talk. The thing is, you're just too idealistic. And it's painful to hear something like that, because if I am going to dream anyway, then I'm going to dream for the best for my people. Why limit myself, right? If you're going to aspire for things like development, then aspire for the best. Besides, what we're talking about here are like basic rights. Is it too much to ask for people in my region and every other place in the world to have access to quality healthcare? Is it too much to ask that no one in the world will be left behind, or no one in the world will have to die simply because they have no money? This is not too much to ask. I think because of the amount of chaos going around the world, and people feel as if it's impossible to achieve such level of peace. But we shouldn't stop believing that it can actually happen. And as a young person, I don't want that idealism to actually die down. It cannot die down. And also, in another point, I would have to say Islamophobia has also been a challenge in doing like certain outreach work. So for me, I believe that this veil on my head doesn't encapsulate my faith as a whole, or my spiritual relationship with the Creator. With or without this, I am me. But then when I do certain outreach work, I would find individuals who would be apprehensive of actually supporting me or going to certain areas, because they would say, that is like a Muslim community, it's too dangerous to go in. So it's very sad to actually do that. But then you would meet individuals as well who would show this level of support, and it would inspire you to keep going on further. I remember there was this one time we wanted to deliver educational materials to this particular community of predominantly Muslim kids, and we were trying to hail a public driver to bring us to that area. Almost everyone said, no, we're not going to go to that area, it's not safe, etc. But then there was one driver who said, yes, I'm fine, like I don't mind bringing you. You know what's his reason? He actually said that I don't mind because before, like, I also lived in Mindanao, and my neighbor was Muslim, some of the nicest people I've met. So again, that kind of exposure that you get, and that kind of educational experience, that one-to-one connection that you can have, can actually break barriers.
Yes, definitely. How do you see the EU's presence in forging peace and security in your region? Maybe mentioning some of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because I know you mentioned about being said that you're too idealistic. The Sustainable Development Goals, one of them is eradicating poverty, feeding everyone. So idealism is not far-fetched.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the European Union has for so many years been an active partner in the pursuit of peace and resilience in the Philippines. The EU ambassador, Franz Jessen, has consistently reiterated this. And in fact, we have the Mindanao Trust Fund, and the EU is the largest contributor to this trust fund. In fact, they contribute as much as 80% to the projects which try to address socioeconomic disparities in Mindanao. But apart from this, there are also so many other projects and funding that the European Union is providing. And you can actually see this, how it reflects, for example, the European Union's global strategy, which focuses on bridging creating resilience, not only within the EU, but also in other countries of the world, and the Philippines is one of those.
And how do you see this, like, how do you turn the funding into, like, social impact?
Well, so such type of funding gets to be implemented in different projects from different projects from private organizations and also from the government as well. So projects that support educational integration, or projects that support continuing peace negotiations with different organizations that, for example, seek to break away and stuff. So this consistent funding actually really helps in making your goals happen, you'd know how it's important to have this have the support.
The resources.
Yeah, the resources.
And do you find, because you mentioned that funding goes both to government organizations but also private organizations, does that ever conflict, that maybe the private organizations are doing work that maybe is not on the same lines of rhetoric of the government?
Well, so far from what I've seen is that all of the projects have been fulfilling, or all of the projects have been geared towards this common agenda of like forging peace and resilience. And I haven't actually encountered like a very controversial issue that there was a clash or there was a mismatch in this.
Nice, thank you. So I have some questions from the other young leaders.
Yes.
I would like to start with a question from Courtney from South Africa. How do you think we can foster acceptance and create social cohesion in countries with a history of conflict between communities?
When it comes to this, I think the role of leaders are very important. It's important to have more leaders who speak values of peace and inclusion. It's important for leaders to inspire their people to not be afraid of the other. My fear is that today we see more and more individuals or political parties going back to that stage of creating further division and civil strife. And we shouldn't do that. People look up to these leaders as leaders who would speak messages of hope. Yes, it might be difficult, but you should lead the way towards this. So that's one thing.
So more leadership.
Exactly, and political will.
Yes. I have another question from Chawa from Botswana. In situations lacking peace and inclusion, most times women are the main victims. How can they be protected?
Well, in the case of the Philippines, for example, or in other countries, you would see that in times of war, or when armed attacks would actually happen, women are vulnerable to abuse in different forms. Sexual abuse, even economic abuse. If you're a mother and you have to feed your kids, or if you're pregnant, how do you even live your life properly? So I think it's important that when we create peace agendas or policy agreements when it comes to this, we give a special focus towards addressing the needs of these women, towards addressing the needs of these girls. And for that to happen, we need to include women and girls at the negotiating panel, that they must be represented as well, because they know what their needs are.
So more women in the leadership voices as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll have one more question from the young leaders. This is from Esenam from Ghana. What do you think is needed to build resilient institutions so as not to let unemployment and gender-based violence ignite violence?
When it comes to this, I feel that, it's, again, you would see how it's tied to the Sustainable Development Goals in general. There can be no sustainable development goal if there is no peace. In the Philippines, in my particular region, it's difficult to provide employment opportunities if your hometown is consistently at the middle of a battle or of airstrikes. So it's important to first settle the region, stabilize it, get rid of terror organizations or of sources of threat. And then after that, it's easier to come in and bring about these projects of providing employment opportunities, supporting entrepreneurial ideas, or projects for young people to get involved in.
Thank you. Maybe one more question. It'd be nice too if you could compare a conflict from a completely different region, so we can get the perspective of how these conflicts often are similar. I have a question from Leonardo from Colombia. Comparing the conflicts in Colombia and in the Philippines, what do you think we can learn from each other?
Well,
and Leonardo speaks. His topic is on youth and talking all about youth empowerment and the voices. So maybe you can reflect on that.
Yes. Okay. So first, I think we can see that regardless of whichever country we come from, and whichever nationality we come from, all of us do not like wars. All of us do not like to be trapped in a system of violence and chaos. So the suffering that I feel, or that my people feel, is in a way helps me to also sympathize or empathize with the suffering that other fellow people feel in different parts of the world. And it's important to see that although it might take such a long time to realize genuine peace and stability, It's important for people, especially young people, since we're the ones going to inherit this world in the future years to come. Do not give up on forging peace. You should stay steadfast to this goal. And I really believe that if we just do that, it would happen in our time frame.
So I think the general themes throughout our conversation are that we should realize that the conflicts throughout the world are often based on the same problems.
Yes.
And it's mostly because we don't communicate with each other, and different cultures and different religions often don't understand each other, and it's often because of a lack of education, because we are living in conflict, and it's difficult to deal with such problems when you're dealing with hunger or dealing with violence.
Precisely. Everything is interconnected when you think about it, and it's difficult if you again have people feeling left behind, people feeling as if they're not included, which is why I really advocate for the importance of inclusion. Include people. In terms of economic development and prosperity, include them. Make them feel as if they could also live a dignified life.
Inclusion and dignity is a main theme also in the new consensus of the European Union. As my last question, is there a key message that you would like people to take away?
Odessa, in building global partnerships in terms of peace and resilience, it's important to recognize that despite the diversity we have, we're actually one as a people. We're one as a family of nations, and thus we don't leave anyone behind. And I think that's also the principle that the EU actually works on. We don't leave other nations behind, right? If fate had dictated otherwise, just imagine, you and I could have been born in the same family, right? But in the same family that's now subjected in deep turmoil. Perhaps you as my sister would have been under a chemical attack, and your feeble body, like right now I'm holding your feeble body, and you're just crying, and my heart would be breaking. That could have happened to us. But fate had dictated otherwise, and you and I are living miles apart from each other. Me from the Philippines and you in the Czech Republic. But then, despite this scenario, for me, you still remain as part of my humanity. And you're part of my humanity both by faith and by choice, because I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that you are my sister. And how can I leave you behind? And how can I think that you're too different from me if it was just a matter of fate that you were born in that setup and me born in this setup? So we can't leave anyone behind in this process. If I could actually share this very beautiful poem by a Persian poet named Sati, he actually says, "Human beings are members of whole, of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, then other members uneasy will remain. Now if you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot remain."
Wow, thank you. That's the very first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is that we are all born in freedom and equality of dignity and rights.
Yes.
Thank you so much for these very insightful and inspiring
Thank you so
messages.
much.
Really. Thank you to all the young leaders that provided questions and support for the European Development Days. This interview has been brought by the Go Think Initiative, and we're about to launch into the European Development Days, and it's very exciting, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. Thank you so much.